Hi, today we're going to talk about the skeletal system. The skeletal system is so important. It has many different functions for us. It makes up the core of our body. It offers support. It offers protection, like the ribs are going to protect our lungs and the heart. It's going to allow for us to move. It's going to be a storage place for minerals like calcium, phosphorus, and it's also going to help blood cell formation. There are four main types of bones that we're going to talk about. The first one is the long bone. These are typically the bones of your arms and your legs. They are relatively slender. You can see how thin they are, and they often have expanded ends. The next type are short bones. You can obviously see that these are much shorter and their ends are not as prominent. And this would be found in the wrist and your ankle. Okay. Flat bones are plate-like and broad. We see this with the skull and in the ribs. The last type is called the regular bones, and they come in a variety of shapes. We do see this with the vertebrae and in the bones of the face. Now, there are two important structures. We do have a ligament. A ligament is going to attach bone to bone. And we also have a tendon, which is going to attach the muscle to the bone. We also have joints. There are three main types of joints. The first one is called fibrous immovable joints. Immovable meaning it does not move. There is no gaps between, and there's hardly any movement. And we see this on our skull. Over time, as we age, our skull plates will fuse together. Right now, yours are still fusing together, and they had to be movable at some point so you could pass through your mother's uterus and out through their vagina. But again, these are bones that do not have much movement between the two bones or a space. The next type is cartilaginous, slightly movable joints. Well, we have a little bit more movement. This is typically found in the vertebrae, and there is a small gap between the bones, and there is typically cartilage in between there to allow for a little bit of movement. The last type is the freely movable joints. This is actually the most common joints, and this is where the bones are separated by a good cavity, and they do get held together by ligaments. This first example is called the ball and socket. We find this in the shoulder and the hip, and you have a great range of motion. You can make a circle with your shoulder or your hip, so there's a nice range of motion. The next one is called the hinge joint. Again, it's freely movable, but it only goes in one direction, so you can move your arm up and down. It doesn't go the opposite way. The last type of joint is called gliding, and we find this in the bones of our wrist. As we move, there are numerous bones that will actually glide past one another. So now we're going to focus in on the structure of the bone. Bone is actually made up of compact bone, cancellous bone, and a bone marrow. Compact bone is very strong, very resistant to bending, very solid, and we typically find this in the length of those long bones. One thing about the compact bones is they're made up of these cells called osteons. The osteons are kind of cylinder shaped units, and they do surround a canal that runs lengthwise throughout the bone. This is going to allow for delivery of nutrients and the removal of waste products. The next type of bone is cancellous. Before we talk about cancellous, I want to just point out that this is compact bone and this is the cancellous. So the cancellous bone is often found at the ends of the bones, and it's very spongy. They do have a lot of spaces within inside of the bone, and that's important because it does have to reduce the weight of the bone, and it does need to have a lot more strength in areas like such as your hip and so forth. It does consist of a structure called trabeculae, which is very needle-like spicules, and the way that they're arranged was actually how architects first designed bridges. They were very amazed about how the human body could withstand so much weight, and they did model the bridge off of the bone structure. The last part of The bone is the bone marrow. This will fill the bone, and it does produce the red blood cells. And when we produce blood cells, we call this hematopoiesis. There's two types. There's red and yellow. Pretty much as a child, as an infant, all of our bones contain red marrow. And as we age, it does get replaced by yellow marrow. And the yellow marrow is a good source of fat storage. If you have any questions, we will talk about them tomorrow in class. Have a great night. Thanks.